Early in 1999, the radioactive dust from recent nuclear tests had barely settled before India and Pakistan tried to lock in a fragile peace. Both nations signed the Lahore Declaration, agreeing to avoid an arms race and keep tensions out of the Himalayas. But as the spring snow melted, that agreement fractured. Pakistani paramilitary forces and regular troops, operating covertly, crossed the line of control. They climbed up and entrenched themselves across 132 vacated Indian outposts on some of the highest peaks in the region. When Indian patrols discovered the infiltration in May, the military faced a brutal geographic reality. Launching a purely ground-based infantry assault up an 18,000-foot mountain against heavily fortified, elevated enemies would result in massive casualties. The Indian armed forces needed air support. They authorized the Indian Air Force to strike the mountain bunkers, launching Operation Safed Sagar. That to avoid triggering a nuclear escalation, the government tied a massive political weight to the mission. This map shows the strict geographical constraint placed on the pilots. The Air Force had orders to annihilate the intruders, but the line of control was a hard limit. Under no circumstances could an Indian jet cross into Pakistani airspace. They had to fly uphill against mountain targets, drop their payloads, and execute severe turns right at the border to avoid an international incident. Confronted by thinning air and a rigid political border, the Air Force was caught in a tactical trap. Every mission required a way to balance the physical limits of the mountains with the absolute legal limit of the line of control. The initial fleet deployed to the conflict zone was built around the backbone of the existing Air Force, aging MiG-21s, MiG-23s, MiG-27s, and unarmored Mi-17 transport helicopters repurposed as gunships. The pilots initially relied on daylight strafing uns and low-altitude bombing, the standard tactics they had trained for. But in the thin, oxygen-deprived air of the Himalayas, jet engines struggled to perform. Coming in low and slow over the ridges left the aircraft dangerously exposed. The consequences were swift and severe. Between May 26th and May 28th, the infiltrators deployed shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. They shot down a MiG-27, a MiG-21, and an Mi-17, resulting in casualties and captured personnel. Recognizing the lethal threat of these heat-seeking missiles against slow targets, the Air Force immediately pulled back. They grounded their remaining fleet of helicopters, withdrawing them entirely from offensive attack roles. The initial days proved that low-altitude attacks against elevated, missile-equipped infantry were fatal. To survive, the pilots had to fly higher, well out of missile range, which required a total departure from the way they had been trained to drop bombs. Pushing altitude to 30,000 feet solved the missile threat, but created a massive targeting problem. The older MiGs lacked modern digital navigation systems. Above the clouds, finding a camouflaged bunker on a snowy peak using only analog instruments was nearly impossible. To find their targets, pilots resorted to rapid, improvised engineering. They brought commercial, handheld GPS receivers into the cockpits, using off-the-shelf satellite navigation to guide supersonic jets through featureless, snow-blind mountains. Pilots used GPS to calculate wind and map lofted trajectories, so unguided bombs followed a parabolic arc. Because soft snow prevented detonation, crews fitted old bombs with pistol cartridges, firing on contact to trigger the explosion at the surface. Taping GPS units to dashboards and rewiring old fuses allowed the older MiG squadrons to keep pressure on the enemy. It was a desperate stopgap, holding the line while the military readied a much heavier, more advanced strike force. By the end of May, the Air Force deployed the Mirage 2000. Unlike the older fleet, the Mirage was specifically designed to handle the aerodynamic stress of rarefied air at high altitudes. These new fighters were rapidly outfitted with Israeli Lightning targeting pods and laser-guided bomb kits. Instead of calculating wind arcs manually, a rear seat weapons officer could now film a target, paint it with a laser, and guide a munition down to the exact meter. The results were immediate. Through June, the Mirages systematically dismantled the heaviest fortifications. They destroyed the supply depot, obliterated bunkers on Tiger Hill, and broke the logistical core. While the Mirages bombed the peaks, the Air Force deployed MiG-29s to fly combat air patrols near the border. Armed with beyond visual range missiles, weapons capable of destroying targets miles before they are even seen. They established air superiority, keeping the Pakistani Air Force firmly grounded. The pairing of high-altitude escorts and pinpoint laser targeting neutralized the enemy's geographical advantage. The Air Force had found a way to project overwhelming firepower without ever crossing the red line on their maps. Pinned down by relentless, accurate bombing and entirely cut off from their supply lines, the infiltrators' chain of command fractured. 5 key officers were killed in a single strike, leaving the mountain troops isolated and freezing. With the enemy softened, the Indian Army advanced. Backed by heavy artillery, ground troops scaled the peaks and recaptured the territory, forcing a total withdrawal of the remaining Pakistani forces by July. Operation Safed Sagar successfully cleared the mountains, but the early losses forced military planners to face a harsh reality. Relying on an aging fleet of analog aircraft in an unforgiving environment had cost them dearly in the opening days. In response, the Ministry of Defense initiated a modernization campaign. They accelerated the co-development of the advanced Su-30 MKI heavy fighter with Russia and poured resources into finalizing their own indigenous fighter, the HAL Tejas, to phase out the old MiG squadrons. Throughout the campaign, mission success had hinged on foreign commercial GPS units taped to dashboards. Following the ceasefire, the Indian Space Research Organization accelerated the development of NAVIC, a domestic satellite constellation designed to give the military independent navigational control. Operation Safed Sagar ended as a victory fought within a strictly defined box. It ended the era of analog, low-altitude dogfighting in the Himalayas and set the technical requirements for the precision-driven military that would follow.